What are you doing here? What's that? Oh, you want me to make a documentary on horror fans? Well, you know, I guess I am the guy to do it, you know? So, let's get started. Are you still following me? Hey, I said I'll do the documentary, all right? You can go home now. I'm gonna do it. Really? You know, being a horror fan is incredible. I wouldn't trade it for the world. I mean, being a fan of this genre is just, there's nothing else like it. Yeah, you got action movies, you have comedy movies, you have all these other genres, but there's no other genre like horror. I think it's amazing how this genre brings people together. There are people who they've never even met each other, and once you start talking about horror with them, it's like you've known each other for years, and it's just insanely cool. I mean, I've met so many great people through YouTube, through Instagram, just talking about horror movies, and I've met some incredible people. This community is absolutely amazing.
I think it's a great thing. You know, of course, I grew up as a kid watching a lot of horror movies, and they've always, you know, fascinated me. It's not like I purposely intended, you know, to become a horror fan. It's just something that happened, you know, throughout life naturally, and it's been great. To me, one of the main things I've always loved is when I come across, you know, for example, new movies, you could say underrated movies or films you just never heard of, and, you know, when you discover them, you're like, oh, what the hell, how come I've never, you know, seen this movie? Stuff like that, you know. I've always said this throughout the years on my YouTube channel. To me, horror is more like a lifestyle. You know, it's definitely more than a genre, if you ask me. And it's definitely played a great part in my life. But yeah, man, I think it's an awesome thing. It's also a little bit different. You could say, you know, back then when I was growing up, it wasn't as common. You know, you could say nowadays it's more common. You know, while everybody was into, you know, the action, you know, the Marvel movies and all that awesome stuff, I was always leaning more towards horror movies. Like I said, they've always fascinated me, and, you know, I've always had a great time with horror movies.
So for me personally, being a horror fan is just so much damn fun. There's no other way to describe it, really. I think the most exciting thing about horror for me is actually introducing friends to the genre and watching their reactions for the first time, because it just really brings me back to when I watched scary movies for the first time. You know, I just really love watching a good suspenseful horror film that just really gets my adrenaline going. And I'm sure a lot of horror fans feel the same way. I also have some close friends in my life, including my girlfriend, who weren't huge fans of the horror genre at first, but then I introduced them to the typical slasher franchises such as Halloween, Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Scream, which were the movies that I started off watching when I was little. And from then on, I began branching out to other paranormal movies such as The Exorcist, The Omen, The Shining, Carrie, Poltergeist, and more. So, in general, it's just so cool that I influenced my close friends to become fans of the franchises. And every time a new horror film releases in theaters, where they see like a preview, either on YouTube or on TV, like a TV spot, you know, they're the first to ask me to go see it with them. And it's just such an awesome feeling.
No matter what makes you a horror fan, at the end of the day, you are a horror fan, and everyone is welcome, and I think that's amazing about the genre and the people who are in the horror community. It's just incredible. the movie that did it for me, honestly, was John Carpenter's Halloween. That is the movie that really made me appreciate the horror genre. Without John Carpenter's Halloween, I don't know if I would be the fan that I am today. I remember being very young and coming home after trick-or-treating and watching Fear Fest, and they would have the Halloween marathon, and I remember the movie having such a big impact on me. It made me appreciate film more, and it just made me realize how much I really love the genre of horror. So I owe a lot to John Carpenter. I mean, without John Carpenter, I don't know. I don't know if I would be as big of a horror fan. I don't know. I don't know if I would. I don't know.
So I became a horror fan instantly when I watched the original Scream for the first time. At this point in my life, I only watched a few really old classic Universal monster movies like Dracula, The Wolfman, Frankenstein, those kind of movies, and The Invisible Man too. But I didn't really see a whole lot of contemporary horror films. I think I watched one called Boogeyman. If you guys remember that movie, it came out back in 2005. That movie was so bad. That was like one of the worst horror movies like I've ever seen. And I could tell was the first, unfortunately, that was like the first contemporary horror film that I've ever seen. And I'm not talking about the new Boogeyman, the 2023 one. I'm talking about the old one. That was atrocious. So that wasn't a great experience. But luckily down the line, I started to watch better horror movies. But yeah, back to Scream. I remember I was hanging out with some friends and one of their older sisters popped in the original, and I vividly remember it snowing outside and there was actually like a huge blizzard, so we were kind of all trapped in the house, and we were also off from school, which was awesome. And I remember we were pretty pumped for this movie. We actually made popcorn and hot chocolate before it started, and as soon as that opening scene started, I knew immediately it was going to be really intense. And I remember the phone call being so creepy, and hearing Roger L. Jackson's voice for the first time just really stuck with me. And I also really like the look of Ghostface, and it was something that I never saw before. The white ghost mask with the sparkly black robe is just such an awesome design choice, and I think it's so cool that anyone could be under the costume. And I also became a horror fan during the Halloween seasons when stores like Party City and Spirit started opening up. And I just remember walking into these stores and seeing an abundance of masks. And I remember just being in there for such a long time, just looking at all the different selections and just being mesmerized.
Like I said earlier, I grew up as a kid watching a lot of horror movies. My early memories of horror are for sure, the iconic franchises like Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th. But yeah, other early memories of horror I have as well, man, are like the 80s nostalgic movies. Those have always been my favorite horror movies. For example, the Stephen King movies. I remember a good handful of Stephen King movies, watching them as a kid and just, being entertained, being just stuck onto the TV. But the one movie in particular, man, that really made me a fan was Freddy vs. Jason. I remember being a kid, man, just running around or whatever, and my parents, they'll be like flipping through the channels or whatever, and Freddy vs. Jason would be like on TV, and they would always call me over, man. Like, it's not like it happened once. It always, like, every time it was on TV, they would call me over. I remember a good 2 or 3 times that they did that. And every time I would just be stuck onto the TV, man, enjoying this movie. And of course, once I got older, I started discovering the other movies in the franchises. So yeah, that was my introduction to horror. To me, my very first favorite horror character was Freddy. Like, Freddy was my guy. But yeah, Freddy vs. Jason was definitely the one that sparked it for me.
No matter what horror movie made you become a horror fan, we all have our stories, and I think that's a really awesome thing. So, what scared you as a kid?
Well, I tell you, a movie kind of put chills down my spine. It's The Exorcist. And the reason why I say that, guys, because I was home alone. And everybody told me the movie is scary. Yeah. Well, me, I'm thinking like, I could watch any kind of movie. Well, when I watch The Exorcist, put it this, I ain't gonna lie to you. It put some chills on my spine, and I about pissed my pants. But I'm gonna tell you one thing about it. When that lady twisted her head and made
You know, what scared me as a kid was Stephen King's It from 1990. Honestly, this was one of the scariest movies I ever seen at that point. I was very young. I did watch the Halloween movies, but Stephen King's It scared me. Pennywise was scary to me. Actually, the first time I watched Stephen King's It, I couldn't finish the movie. I got to the point to where Pennywise was all like, "Hiya, Georgie."
Hi, Georgie. Aren't you going to say hello?
And then Pennywise killed Georgie, and I just couldn't finish the movie. And then, of course, as time went on, I did end up watching the entire miniseries, and I was so proud of myself. I'm glad I watched it. And but before that point, I was so obsessed with the movie because it scared me so much I couldn't stop thinking about it. It drove me to the point to where I was afraid to walk around sewer drains, like I was terrified. And I finally overcome that fear, and then I watched the entire miniseries, and I loved it. And I would also say that Stephen King's It is one of the reasons why I am a horror fan, also John Carpenter's Halloween, but Stephen King's It also played a big part in that. And that's another reason why I love the genre of horror so much. I feel like there are scenes in horror movies that you'll remember for the rest of your life because it impacted you so much, and no other genre does that. And Stephen King's It definitely did that for me. I just couldn't stop thinking about the movie, especially that scene where Pennywise, kills Georgie. It just stuck with me and it scared me, and it's a story that I'll remember for the rest of my life, and I think that's really awesome.
So the horror movie that scared me the most as a kid was definitely the original Exorcist. I remember my uncle owning a copy of this movie, and I was pretty much forbidden from watching it. Not by my uncle, but my parents, because I think at this point I was like maybe 7 years old. And the front cover also like really freaked me out for some reason. Actually, no, it wasn't the front cover, it was the back. Because I remember on the front cover, it's the priest, walking into the house. But on the back, they actually showed Regan's face, and she was like scarred and everything. And that just like really freaked me out. And also the scary maze game. Do you guys remember that? I remember my sister like really tricked me with that, and I played that game and I like fell off my chair. So yeah, Linda Blair's face and the makeup just like always creeped me out for a long time. So again, at this point when I was like 7, I was forbidden from watching it because I was pretty young. But one day I was just home alone, and I think at this point I was like maybe 8 or 9. So, I wasn't like that young, but I decided to watch it, and man, that was a terrifying experience. I think the most terrifying scenes have got to be the disturbing crucifix scene. Also, another notable one is when she's levitating off the bed and the priests are saying their iconic line, "Let the power of Christ compel you," And again, another one is, spoiler alert, when Damien Karras gets possessed by Pazuzu and then he goes flying out the window, and then Regan's just crying there on the floor. This movie made me not be able to sleep for a few days, but even though I was scared, I could still tell that I was intrigued by the story. And the second time I watched it, though, I wasn't scared because I knew what to expect, but that movie definitely played a huge role in my childhood trauma, I guess you could say.
As a kid growing up, I was more fascinated with these movies than scared, but there was a few movies that actually scared me as a kid, I was frightened of. And that is the Child's Play movies. Of course, as a kid, man, the concept of your killer dog coming to life, pretty scary. So yeah, man, I remember they would always try to scare me purposely with the damn Chucky movies. Like when I would misbehave or whatever. And there was a few times, man, where I would just be scared as shit watching some of these movies. For example, I have early memories. The one movie I was always scared of, which now is kind of like a silly movie, but Bride of Chucky, man. Bride of Chucky is the one I remember the most as a kid, being on TV or whatever. And, at that time growing up, Bride of Chucky was still kind of a recent film. So it will be everywhere, man. I remember Chucky stickers were everywhere. But yeah, man, Bride of Chucky, even the damn Tiffany doll, I was just always scared of, man. So Bride of Chucky for sure is a movie that scared me as a kid. Just seeing, of course, that's when Chucky gets the scars, his new look. Of course, it is quite frightening for a kid. Another one I remember being scared of from the Chucky series is the original Child's Play. We all know that's kind of like the darker Child's Play in the series. And yeah, I have always had early memories of that too, man. To me, the clean-faced Chucky, the good guy version of the Chucky, was always the scariest, more than the Scar version. But yeah, for sure, man, that's always my go-to answer, are the Chucky movies for sure.
So Having a horror YouTube channel is definitely a blessing, to say the least. I really enjoy making videos, talking about all kinds of horror films. I also enjoy doing live streams, mask reviews, costume videos, unboxings, and much more. And, you know, it's just such an honor to get to do what I love to do and get paid for it. And not many people can say that. You know, since 2016, I've actually been eligible for YouTube's partner program. So I do receive ad revenue from the videos, but it's not like a ton of money like you would typically think. It's a decent amount every now and then. And usually I just put that money towards new masks so I can do more reviews. And also another thing, I did meet some awesome friends along the way, including Horror Bloody Horror, who is actually making this awesome documentary. My good friend Michael Myers, Nightmare Fuel Studios, Ghostface Reviews, Nightmare Crypt, and much more. And I just really love being involved in the comments section, replying to all my comments, and just talking to people about horror, even off camera. I just think it's awesome. And the one thing that is a little bit tricky about making videos is just staying consistent. There are some days where I'm just like really busy outside of YouTube and I just don't have any time to upload. And it's not that I don't want to upload, but my schedule can sometimes get pretty hectic. And sometimes I go like a month without uploading. And I try to avoid going more than a month without uploading because I just don't want my audience to forget about me. So I'm working on taking advantage of the day that I'm free to upload and just make like an abundance of videos all at once. And then upload like, you know, whenever I can, basically. So that's my plan right now. You know, rather than like taking one day to just make one video, I'll probably make like 5 or 6 and then upload them when I have time. So yeah, but overall, I'm so glad that I discovered YouTube. It's such a great platform, and I'm really excited to upload more horror-related content for people to enjoy.
It's just a great thing. Like, I've never imagined myself till this day to still be making videos. Of course, as a kid, when we're growing up, we usually do these videos for fun, for the hobby of it. Like, I kind of still feel it like a hobby, man, because next year is gonna be 10 years that I've been doing YouTube. And if you guys have been around from the beginning, you guys know that there's a few gaps in between where I spent some time without uploading. And it's not purposely, but you know, just life happens, you grow up, and you don't really have that same time to make videos. But whenever I would always like fall back or, you know, have some times on my hands, I would always have a go-to, and that was YouTube, man. And it always gave me a great response. One of my personal favorite things about YouTube is just interacting, man, with the subscribers. Like I said, I could go some time without uploading, and you know, the next minute I decide to do a video, people are still tuning in. And I think that's what kind of the drive has stuck in me, you know, just interacting with other YouTubers, other fans. And throughout the years, man, I have met, you know, a lot of good people on YouTube, man, that I still talk to this day. Of course, I've seen many people come and go, and there's only a few, man, that have kind of are still consistent. That's one thing too, man. I always try to stay consistent with, you know, the videos. I started YouTube trying to, you know, gamble into the whole short films. That's kind of like my main reason why I started YouTube. I wanted to do like my own storylines, my own short films in particular. But of course, once my collection started growing, I started doing, you know, reviews and showing you guys different pieces. I kind of started leaning more towards that instead of short films. Like even now, I don't really like that desire, that drive of making short films kind of went away, you know, because I just feel I kind of had that drive more when I was a kid, you know. Now my content is mostly about movies and talking about different discussions and stuff like that. But it's always great, man. Like I said, it's always been good to me. I've never had any problem with it at all. Like an instant where I'll be like, okay, forget all of this, I don't want to turn back to it. Like I said, there's just times where you just don't really have the motivation, or I wouldn't say the motivation, but you just don't have the time. And it's like I lean back to YouTube, and it's always a great thing, man. So it's definitely helped me throughout the years. And I always have fun, man, creating different content. You know, I'd be doing the live streams as well, which is, it's kind of what I started doing more recently, because, you know, on the live streams, you get to interact with the people, you know, rather than just commenting back and forth.
You know, being a YouTuber in general is not easy. You know, anyone who does a YouTube channel will know what I'm talking about. It's always a fight to get bigger numbers, more subscribers, and it's just never easy. But being a horror YouTuber, I feel like is even harder because, you know, not everyone is horror fans. Not everyone digs the same horror movies that you do. So being a horror YouTuber is just complicated. And it's something that I'm happy with doing. I love being a horror YouTuber. I've been doing it for almost 5 years. And it's very fun. It's just one of those things where you have to have patience. You have to have the time to let your numbers grow. There's a lot of people who they'll go around in DMs and ask people like, hey, subscribe to my channel, I'm a horror fan. That's just not the way to do it. I'd rather be found out more than just asking people like, hey, can you sub to my channel? I feel like that's more of baiting. And I'm just not a fan of that. But being a horror YouTuber, it's not easy. It takes time. And you definitely need to be passionate about the genre if you're going to be a horror YouTuber. But being a YouTuber in general is never easy, but it's a lot of fun, I will say that. And I'm happy to be one. There's times where it stresses me out, but I'm definitely happy to be a YouTuber. And I'm happy that I have my face in the horror community. It's just fun. You meet a lot of people, a lot of great people, and it's just a good time. That's probably how I would describe being a horror YouTuber. So you're a fan of Halloween, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you like Michael Myers?
Yeah.
Yeah, the dude who directed it, Wes Craven? Yeah, he did good, didn't he?
Yeah.